Hello everyone, and welcome to our online lecture for Psych 1101 and Psych 1010 at Lanier Technical College. My name is Michael Holman. I am a psychology instructor here at Lanier Tech, and I will be your narrator. Please note that these lectures are intended to assist you in better understanding the material and should not be considered a substitute for attending lecture, reading the text, or completing your assignments. With that said, let's get started talking about consciousness. So this time around, we're going to define consciousness, explain the nature of sleep and various sleep disorders. We will explain various uses of hypnosis, forms of medication, and biofeedback techniques in altering consciousness. We will explain the concepts of substance abuse, identify categories of drugs, and how they alter consciousness. True or false? We act out our forbidden fantasies in our dreams. Trick question. This could be true, could be false, depends on who you talk to. Insomnia can be caused by trying too hard to fall asleep. This is true. It is dangerous to awaken a sleepwalker. This can be true. You can be hypnotized against your will. This is false. You can teach a rat to raise or lower its heart rate. This is true. Many health professionals calm down hyperactive children by giving them a stimulant. This is true. Coca-Cola once added life to its signature drink through the use of a powerful but now illegal stimulant. This is true. That stimulant was cocaine. The number of people who die from smoking-related causes is greater than the number lost to motor vehicle accidents, abuse of alcohol, and all other drugs, suicide, homicide, and AIDS combined. And this is actually true. The trick here, because you're thinking, what, is smoking-related. There are a lot of things that can kill you that smoking has the potential to cause. And so that's how it's able to beat out all of those other things combined. So let's start. What is consciousness? Well, consciousness has a couple of different levels to it. There's sensory awareness, selective attention, direct inner awareness, sense of self, and just being awake. Consciousness also has a few cousins. There is preconscious, which is stuff that you are not currently aware of, but is readily available. Think memories, habits, things like that. Your unconscious, which is unavailable to awareness under most circumstances. So this is stuff that you are not aware of. And your non-conscious, bodily processes that cannot be experienced through sensory awareness. So, for example, the daily functionings of your digestive system. You're not really conscious of it. You're not aware of it, but it's happening right now. So now we're going to focus on sleep and dreams. So how does sleep work? Well, we start with your circadian rhythm. This is a cycle that is connected with the 24-hour period of Earth's rotation. It is a cycle of being awake, or wakefulness, and being asleep. Your biological cycle is linked to your body temperature and is influenced by bright light and dark light. Your body's clock resets each day at daylight. So daylight is really what starts your body over on the circadian rhythm. But there are a number of ways to disrupt this rhythm. Number one, if you fly west, you might find yourself having longer periods of daylight. But if you fly east, you'll have less time to adapt to that jet lag. So the more daylight that you have when flying west, the more signals are being sent to your brain telling you to be awake. But if you fly east, then you have less time to be awake, and so you're going to want to go to sleep, even though your body is used to being awake for longer, and so you experience jet lag. We also see this in the effects of shift work, where it is easier to rotate from a night shift to a day shift as a result. With night shift, it can be difficult. I did it for many, many years. Working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 days a week, and when you're working the night shift, it makes doing things during the day very difficult. But should you get lucky enough to get rotated back into day shift and no longer have to do nights anymore, then you would think, oh man, I'm going to have to sleep in the mornings all the time now and it's going to mess me up, I'm going to be tired. But your body is able to adapt quite quickly. I know that I got over my 5 years of working the night shift within about a week. And then I was used to working in a day schedule. So our bodies will take that daylight and use it to keep us awake, and we'll just respond accordingly. There are a number of stages of sleep. Using EEG records, which is electroencephalograph, if you remember from a couple chapters ago, sleep stages are recorded by different brain waves. Most of these stages are called non-rapid eye movement sleep stages, or NREM. These are the first 4 stages of sleep. Stage 1 is the lightest and stage 4 is the deepest. And there is a 5th stage of sleep known as rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. So we start here with being awake. And you see we've got just regular beta waves, so low amplitude, high frequency. Hopefully those terms are familiar to you. And then you start to get a little sleepy, you get a little drowsy, and your brain waves have now changed to alpha waves. The amplitude has gotten higher, and the frequency has begun to slow down. Remember, this brain wave, this little sketch right here, is the amount of electrical activity going on inside of your brain. By stage 1 of sleep, you're developing theta waves, which have low frequency and low amplitude. Think of this as a transition stage from being awake to getting into being asleep. By stage 2, you start to develop these guys. These are known as sleep spindles, and they also will develop a K complex. This is when you have these varying dips in amplitude for your brain waves. From stage 2, which is just considered being asleep, lightly asleep, we move to stage 3 sleep. This is the beginning of delta waves, and it's another transition period. But now you're transitioning from just being slightly asleep to being deeply asleep. So stage 3 is a transition period. Your brain waves are really slowing down at this point. By stage 4, you now are passed right out. This is delta sleep, as we also call it. And you have nothing but delta waves. So you are deep asleep. And notice how deep and long the amplitude of these waves are. We also have REM sleep. And what's really interesting about REM sleep is that, number one, it occurs when we re-enter stage 1, about 90 minutes after falling asleep. And we call it paradoxical sleep. We'll discuss that in a second. But notice that the brainwave patterns for REM sleep are very similar to stage 1 sleep. So they're very, very similar, and that becomes important in a second. So stage 1 is the beginning of the sleep cycle. You begin to produce theta waves, and you will be in this stage for about 5 to 10 minutes. If you wake someone up in this stage, they might report that they weren't really asleep to begin with. Stage 2 is the second stage of sleep and lasts for about 20 minutes. The brain begins to produce bursts of rapid rhythmic brainwave activity known as sleep spindles, and your body temperature decreases and your heart rate begins to slow. You have gone into sleep mode. At stage 3, you begin to develop delta waves in your brain waves. And this is also a transitional period between light sleep and deep sleep. At stage 4, you are in delta sleep because you have such slow brain waves. This is when you have the deepest sleep, and it lasts for about 30 minutes. This is also when bedwetting and sleepwalking usually occur. Stage 5 is when most dreaming happens, especially dreaming that we can remember. During this 5th stage of sleep, known as rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, it is characterized by eye movement, increased respiration rate, and increased brain activity. We call REM sleep paradoxical sleep because while the brain and other body systems become more active, our muscles become more relaxed. So our body is clearly asleep, but our brain acts as if it's awake. Dreaming occurs because of increased brain activity, but our voluntary muscles become paralyzed. This is known as sleep paralysis. So, once again, stage 1 is when our brains slow down from alpha to theta waves, and a hypnagogic state may be experienced. In a few slides, we'll learn more about this hypnagogic state, but know that it happens in stage 1 of sleep. Stage 2, you begin to develop sleep spindles and you have entered sleep mode. Stages 3 and 4, you have delta waves, with 4 being the deepest version of sleep. REM sleep is characterized by rapid eye movements, paradoxical sleep, and when you are awakened in REM sleep, 80% of participants report having dreams. Typically, we undergo about 5 cycles of these 5 stages throughout our sleep. The first time we enter stage 4 sleep is usually the longest time we're in stage 4. Sleep becomes lighter as the night wears on, and REM sleep becomes longer as the night wears on, with our last period of REM being about 30 minutes. And here is a great little graph to show you the standard amount of sleep cycles that we go through. So let's say it's 11 o'clock. You are ready for bed, you lay down, you are awake here, and shortly after you find yourself drifting off to sleep. You're in stage 1. Your brain waves have started to slow down. They slow down even more to stage 2. You develop those sleep spindles. Then we make delta waves. Now we're even deeper asleep until we get to stage 4, and you are passed right out. But here's where things get interesting. As soon as we get to the lowest stage, to stage 4, your brainwave activity starts to speed up. So you go to 3, you go to 2. But notice this. Every single time, instead of going to stage 1, when you try to go from 2 to 1, you will instead hit stage 5, or REM sleep. So you went to stage 2, your brain sped up to REM sleep, and then it went to stage 1. Then you slowed down to 2, to 3, to 4, speed up to 3, speed up to 2, slow down to 3, speed up to 2, sped up just enough to get to 1, but instead of 1, we get REM sleep again. Then up to 1, slow down to 2, slow to 3, speed up to 2, sped up just enough to get to 1, it's REM sleep again. Then we get to stage 1. Down to 2, down to 3, up to 2, the dog barked, oh god, I'm awake. Then I immediately go back to sleep, bam, right back in the REM sleep. Then the alarm goes off, I hit the snooze button, go back to take a little bit of a nap, snooze button goes off, I turn off the alarm, go right to sleep, go right into REM sleep, and I'm going to be late for work. And that is the typical sleep cycle. So why do we sleep in the first place? Well, number 1, sleeping rejuvenates the body. It makes us feel better. It helps our body to heal. It helps us recover from stress. It can help us to consolidate learning and memories. This is why we will often tell people to sleep on it. If they're struggling with a problem, they might come to the solution when they wake up. And it also helps promote development of infants' brains. This is why babies sleep so much. They're growing. How much sleep you need partly depends on your genetics. Additional sleep is needed when you're under stress. So the more stress you're going through, the more sleep you're going to need. But as you age, you require less sleep. And this is why early bird specials exist. Because older people don't need sleep as much. And so they get up earlier. Businesses know that there are people that are just walking around awake. Might as well let them come in so they make some money. Individuals deprived of REM sleep tend to learn more slowly, forget what they have learned quicker, and show something called REM rebound. So what's interesting about this is that REM rebound is if you've ever pulled an all-nighter, if you've stayed awake for 24 hours or 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever, and at the end of all that, you finally allow yourself to go to sleep, you pass right out. You go completely to sleep, and you usually, most people, have the most vivid dreams. You experienced REM rebound in that moment, because it turns out your brain craves REM sleep. It craves a time where your body isn't moving, but your brain is very active, and it needs it. And so when you deprive yourself of REM sleep, the moment you allow yourself to have it, your brain takes you straight there and allows you to have the biggest REM sleep that it can. That REM sleep nourishes your brain, and that's why it needs it so badly. Dreams, what are they? Well, dreams are cognitive activity that occurs while you are sleeping. Remember, cognitive means thinking, so we're talking about mental activity that occurs while you're sleeping. Most dreams are most vivid during REM sleep, and you can dream in color or black and white, and you can have a beautiful dream or a nightmare. The meaning of dreams. So this is up for debate. It really depends on who you talk to. According to Freud, dreams are day residue, where you have one character or an event from your day that day or your week earlier in your life, and all of a sudden they just appear in your dream, even though they weren't that special to you. They were just someone that stuck in your mind, and now they're there. Because of this day residue, your dreams are going to be most commonly involving events and concerns of your daily life. You also will have stimulus incorporation, where something in your real environment is directly incorporated into your dream. So this is why you might often dream of being in a classroom, if you're in a classroom all the time. Or you might dream of being at work, because you're at work all the time. It's just your brain incorporating all these different things that are a regular part of your life. But psychologists' view vary on the meaning of dreams. We're not really sure what a dream actually means. If you talk to Freudians, they'll say that dreams mean hidden conflicts and motives of your unconscious mind, and that these are all held symbolically in dreams. And this symbolism can manifest at the manifest level, which is the obvious. So Freud would often say, if you dream of a cigar, it means you like cigars. Duh. Or it could mean the latent content level, the hidden meaning. So for example, if you dream of a black dog, then it might have a hidden meaning that you fear that doom is coming for your family. And that's just one example. But there's controversy over Freud's interpretations. And that is one of the reasons why I personally don't invest in dream interpretation. It's not really my scene. But a lot of people do follow it. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, you are more than welcome to go online, go to Google, search for a dream interpretation. But the problem comes in that many of Freud's interpretations were based on his own culture. And so today we have a similar issue where people will give off different interpretations for symbols occurring in dreams that are all based on different cultures. So you really want to take that into account before you start looking into any hidden meanings that might be in your dreams. So why do we dream what we dream? Well, as we've already established, it could just be memories of your day. They could be traumatic events and you're working through them. We call this a nightmare. Or, as Freud would say, they could be a reflection of some unconscious desire you might have. So that was the fun way of looking at dreams, that they mean something, that it's all cool stuff that's come from your day. This is not that. This is the bare bones, purely scientific way of looking at dreams. It's known as the activation synthesis model of dreaming. And according to this theory, acetylcholine, that's a neurotransmitter, and the pons stimulate responses that can lead to dreaming. Reticular activation system stimulates parts of the cortex involved in memory, and the cortex then synthesizes sources of stimulation into your dreams. You are most likely to dream of recent events. So to summarize all this up, really what we're saying with this particular model is that it's just your brain sending out random electric shocks. It's just your brain firing off randomly. Synapses are just going everywhere. It doesn't mean anything. It's just your brain working through some things while you're in REM sleep. Okay, so moving on from dreams, now let's talk about sleep disorders, of which there are a few. We have here insomnia, narcolepsy, which can lead to sleep paralysis, and sleep apnea. So we also will experience nightmares. Most of us have had these before. These are just scary dreams. They occur during REM sleep and are upsetting enough to wake you up. Night terrors, however, are not nightmares. They are far less common, and this occurs when you awaken in a state of panic, sometimes screaming with poor memory of dream content. But these night terrors occur during the deepest phases of non-REM sleep. So one of the really interesting things is that you don't remember anything that happens during non-REM sleep. That's why you remember dreams in REM sleep and not any other time. So if night terrors are scary enough to terrify you awake, The only good news is that you're probably not going to be affected by them much while you're awake, because you won't remember them. You don't remember if it's in your non-REM sleep stages. Another sleep phenomena is sleepwalking. This occurs in the deepest phases of non-REM sleep, causes someone to rise out of bed, carry on complicated activities, and is very common in children before the age of puberty, but we also see it in people that are taking certain medications. I have a lot of sleepwalking stories with clients. I had one story where a police officer was called out to a neighborhood because they said there was a man staring in people's windows in the middle of the night. So he comes out there and he discovers that it was a young teenage boy walking around from window to window in his boxers, just staring into the windows. Turns out he had just taken some new medication, and one of the side effects was sleepwalking, and he didn't realize it. And so he was sleepwalking, staring into windows. We also have seen cases that are not as fun. There was one story of a man that woke up and he knew his father had a problem with sleepwalking, and this was in Boston, and he found that the door was left open, and they were having a terrible blizzard that night, and they couldn't find his dad anywhere. They found him eventually. 2 hours later, he had walked 2 miles in his boxers, and he froze to death in the snow. Another story shows a woman that left in the middle of the night, and she climbed to the top of a construction crane in her nightgown. And one of my favorite stories is a story of a couple that came to me for couples counseling. And so they come in one day, and the wife is just all upset. And I said, well, what's going on? What's happening? And she says, well, we're supposed to be on this diet together, and I keep finding fast food wrappers all over the house, and he's hiding them. He's stashing them in places where I can't see them at first. And the husband swears that he is not cheating on their diet, and he can prove it. And so he sets up a camera, unknown to her, and so what we eventually found out was that it wasn't him. It was the wife. She was getting up in the middle of the night. She would go downstairs, she would grab the keys, go into the garage, get in the car, drive, keep that in mind, while she's asleep, to a nearby fast food restaurant. She would pay them, assumingly in cash. She would get her food, she would come home, she would eat it, and then she would stash the wrappers somewhere for her to find in the morning when she's awake and get mad at her husband. That is what we mean by complicated activities. Incredibly dangerous. There's also sleep talking, which is very common in any phase of sleep cycle. This is when you talk in your sleep. I knew of one client who actually sang in his sleep. It was very interesting. Sleep disorders are usually troublesome but highly treatable disorders, and sleep is normal once these begin. You might have heard of insomnia, where you sleep less than you want to, but there are actually 2 different types of insomnia. There's sleep onset disorder, which is difficulty falling asleep when desired, and early awakening insomnia, where you wake up too early or several times during the night. So it's either insomnia where you can't go to sleep at all, or insomnia where you just keep waking up, and so you never get that rest that you need. Narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a rare sleep disorder. It affects 0.5%, but the impact can be quite serious. In this case, the person is suddenly, unexpectedly asleep during any activity or event. You might have dream sleep, but you won't have REM sleep during this time. So these people will just fall asleep. And it affects people even that get adequate sleep. Sleep apnea is a sudden, temporary interruption of breathing during sleep. So these interruptions can last longer than 20 seconds, are common in overweight and older adults, and can be caused by too much relaxation of throat muscles or temporary cessation of brain signals for breathing. So yes, it's not just really bad snoring and there's something in the way. Sometimes your brain forgets to tell you to breathe. And that's why many people diagnosed with sleep apnea are supposed to wear their masks. And you've probably seen those, they're called CPAP machines. And you wear this mask because it's supposed to force air just in case your brain forgets to tell you to breathe. Deep sleep disorders like sleepwalking, bedwetting, sleep terrors occur in stages 3 or 4 and are most common in children. Okay, so that was talking about consciousness. Now, let's talk about, instead of sleep, ways that we can alter your consciousness and what we can do while we're in it. We're talking about relaxation here. And the first way we want to talk about relaxation is with hypnosis. This is an altered state of consciousness in which people are suggestible and behave as though they are in a trance. It is used in medical procedures, and you are known as having a hypnotic trance. However, hypnotic suggestibility is very important. You can only be hypnotized if you want to be hypnotized. For example, there was a great story of a woman that came on Britain's Got Talent, and she claimed that her dog, if you stared into its eyes long enough, would put you into a hypnotic trance, and then you could do whatever you were suggested to do. And so, of course, they had audience members come out on stage, and they stared at her, and they stared at the dog, and the music got really intense, and the dog stared back, and everybody in the audience that was a volunteer fell asleep. Wow, that's amazing. And then they had the two hosts come out, and so the hosts come out, and they stare into the dog's eyes, and the dog stares back, and the music is really intense, and they fell asleep. But there was one judge at Britain's Got Talent that was still not convinced. You might have heard of him. His name is Simon Cowell. So he gets up on stage, and he stares into the dog's eyes, and the dog stares back, and he stares into the dog's eyes some more, and the dog stares back, and the music is really dramatic and really intense, and nothing happens. Because if you don't want to be hypnotized, you cannot be hypnotized. You must be willing to get completely relaxed. That's the only way that it can happen. Remember stage 1? You'll sometimes have that hypnagogic state. That's this. You get into a hypnagogic state where you are now in a trance and you are open to suggestibility. So how does hypnosis work? Well, if you're in this trance, you're going to follow either role theory or response set theory. Really both. The idea here is that as someone hypnotized, you cannot do something you don't know how to do. If you don't have the ability to fly, I can't hypnotize you and then suddenly you're able to fly. It's just not possible. What you'll do instead, though, is that you will perform a role. Think of someone that is hypnotized as the most willing actor you have ever seen in your life. They will do anything they can to the best of their ability. So, for example, there is one hypnotist, he has videos online, and what often happens in his shows is that members of the audience that are not on stage with him will sometimes fall asleep and fall into a hypnotic trance. And so he will incorporate them into the act. And so what he'll do is, in this particular instance, he had these kids that were asleep in the audience. And he said, okay, what's going to happen is at some point, I am going to say the name of my website, which is hypnosisevents.com. And when you hear me say my website's name, I want you to stand up and immediately start shouting at me angrily in Chinese. So sure enough, he's going through his act, and at some point he reminds them to visit his website, hypnosisevents.com, and sure enough, those kids stand up and start screaming at him in what they think Chinese sounds like. Keep in mind, these were a bunch of white kids from the Midwest. This is in Utah or somewhere. They didn't know Chinese. They didn't know anything related to Chinese. But they had an idea of what Chinese sounded like. And so they yelled at them in a bunch of gibberish. That is the response set theory. You will perform the task that you have been asked to do to the best of your ability, but you can't do something that you don't know how to do in the first place. If they knew how to speak Chinese, absolutely, they would have yelled at him in what Chinese they knew. But they didn't, so they did the best they could. Moving on from hypnosis, we also have meditation. Meditation is focusing your consciousness to alter the relationship between the self and the environment. Two types of meditation include transcendental meditation and mindfulness meditation. Transcendental meditation is the classic form of meditation. It is the hum, deep breath in, deep breath out, deep breath in, deep breath out. The idea is that you are focusing on a mantra. You are focusing on saying something like deep blue oceans, back and forth, back and forth. And what will happen, as long as you keep your breathing up, is that you'll get relaxed. And you'll go into a more relaxed state. And this allows you to kind of let your cares and your worries go away. Mindfulness meditation is very interesting. It allows us to focus on the present versus ruminating on problems. Mindfulness is something I love to do all the time in my practice. And one way that we often will see it used is through a technique known as the 5x5 rule. So we're going to try this one. I want you to look around your room, the room that you're in right now. Just take a look, and I want you to pick 5 objects in that room. And I want you to mentally describe them for me. Well, how is their shape, their size, their color, their texture? How does it look? Really go into detail in your mind about each of the 5 objects. Now, I want you to close your eyes. Listen for 4 sounds in your room. Once again, describe those sounds. Are they loud? Are they soft? What's the pitch like? Does it remind you of anything? Keep your eyes closed. Now, I want you to focus on 3 items near you that you can touch. Feel them. Take note of how smooth or rough they feel. Are they cold? Are they warm? Once you've described those 3 objects that you're touching, which could even be your shirt, go ahead and take note of 2 items that you can smell. What are 2 smells in this room? What do they smell like? What do they make you think of? And finally, I want you to taste one thing. This could be maybe some lunch that you have, or the spit in your mouth. Maybe you've got some gum. Maybe you have some water nearby. But I want you to taste it. How does it feel? What does it taste like? What does it remind you of? This is an example of the 5x5 method, which is a technique used in mindfulness meditation. Usually we would go a lot slower, obviously, and you would think that it's kind of silly, right? But this actually works. I actually had a student one time who was talking to me about his grades, and what I didn't know at the time was that he suffered from PTSD. And while he was talking to me about his grades, he started to have an anxiety attack right in front of me. So I switched from being a professor to being a therapist. And we did the 5x5 method that you just did. Sure enough, he came out of his panic attack that quickly. So meditation can be very useful and very effective to help you get away from anxiety and stress that might be bothering you. Another form of relaxation therapy is known as biofeedback trading. This is a system that provides information about a bodily function in order to gain some control over it. So what you might do is use something like an electromyograph to monitor muscle tension, right? And so the machine is telling you how tense your muscles are, and so you will then be aware of how tense those muscles are. And sometimes we can learn to control this tenseness. This is another method for dealing with relaxation. What I want you to do is to extend your right arm out in front of you and make a fist as tight as you possibly can, and really hold on to that fist. Make it very tight and hold it. Now tighten the rest of your arm, and I want you to hold all of this as tightly as you possibly can and keep holding it until I tell you to let go. Keep holding. Almost there. Slowly release your thumb only. Now, slowly release your pointer finger. Slowly release your middle finger. Release the next finger. Release your pinky finger. Relax only your hand, and slowly allow the rest of your arm to relax, ending at the shoulder. Does your arm feel lighter? Do you feel maybe a little bit more relaxed in that arm afterwards? This is part of biofeedback training. What we will do with clients is we will ask them to actually tense up their entire body. So they might lie down in a couch or a bed somewhere, and they'll do what you just did, but for their entire body, toes and all. And they'll start at their toes and slowly release all the way up. So there are lots of different ways to help someone relax and get into a meditative state. But there's another way that many people deal with stress, that they try to deal and get relaxed, and it alters your consciousness quite a bit, and that's drugs. So, substance abuse is repeated use of a substance despite impaired functioning. Substance dependence is characterized by a loss of control over use of that substance. When you organize your life around getting and using a substance, that is being dependent on it. The more you use any substance, the more tolerance you build up, and when you have too much of a substance, you will go through withdrawal symptoms when you no longer have that substance. There are a number of reasons why someone might abuse and become dependent on a substance. It could start out as just being curious, so they experiment. They might be recommended to try this drug, or observe others having fun with it, so they want to have fun too, right? They might be encouraged by their peers or see positive effects of using that drug. They might want to avoid withdrawal effects because they've used it already. Or they could have a genetic predisposition towards becoming physiologically dependent. When your consciousness is altered thanks to drugs, it induces an altered state involving chemicals. When this happens, we call these drugs psychotropic drugs. These influence specific neurotransmitters in your brain and can have a range of effects from mild to vivid hallucinations. There are 4 major categories: depressants, which cool you down, they chill you out; stimulants, which amp you up; inhalants, which are inhaled; and hallucinogens, which make you hallucinate and experience things that are not there. Drug use can involve addiction, the overwhelming compulsive desire to keep using the drug; tolerance, which comes from prolonged use; dependency, where your nervous system now needs the drug to function; and withdrawal, where you experience painful physical and psychological symptoms. We'll start with alcohol. Alcohol is the most abused drug. Roughly 10 to 20 million Americans are alcoholics. Half of all Americans use alcohol regularly, and about 4 college students die every day from alcohol-related causes. And this is usually the result of binge drinking. Especially in college. I was in college once too. I get it. I understand that many students are going to be tempted to want to binge drink, where you play things like Circle of Death or whatever, and you have lots and lots and lots of alcohol, right? But the problem is that too much alcohol can lead to things like alcohol poisoning, and you can die. It can also make you incredibly drunk, and you make very poor decisions like driving or walking around on railroad tracks, which has happened numerous times, where students were run over by trains because they were walking on the tracks when drunk and they didn't get out of the way. Alcohol is a depressant. It slows activity of your central nervous system, and the effects can include lower inhibitions and impaired cognitive functioning and coordination. Remember, that's mental functioning and coordination. This is why you should not drive, because alcohol specifically impairs these things. Also, notice lower inhibitions. So if you ever have a significant other and you find out that they kissed or they cheated on you with someone else and they say, "Oh, but baby, it doesn't count because I was drunk. I would never do that sober." Remember, alcohol lowers inhibitions. It does not turn you into a completely different person. So that means that this person was always attracted to and always had the desire to do whatever it is that they did when they were drunk. It's just the alcohol allowed them to do it. There was nothing that stopped them. So do with that as you will. Men are more likely to become alcoholics than women, but alcohol has a stronger effect on women. Asians and Asian Americans are less likely than Europeans and European Americans to drink to excess, but Asians are more likely to show a flushing response when they drink. Alcohol can very easily lead to a physiological dependence. The next category of drugs is opiates. These are a group of narcotics derived from the opium poppy. You can have laboratory-produced opioids like morphine, heroin, codeine, and Demerol. And the main reason that we use these is for pain relief. Morphine especially was used in World War I and World War II to help people deal with amputated limbs and things of that nature. Opiates provide a strong euphoric rush. They make you feel really good, but they can lead to dependence incredibly fast. Barbiturates are depressants with medical uses. They're used to help with relaxation, pain management, treatment of epilepsy, high blood pressure, and insomnia. They also can very quickly lead to dependence, and it is incredibly dangerous to mix barbiturates and alcohol. Why? Because they're both depressants. So if you've got alcohol, which is already bringing you down, and then you have barbiturates, which are bringing you down as well, you might not get back up. That is the problem with mixing these guys. So many psychotropic drugs are used and abused today. We've talked about uppers, but there's also caffeine. Yes, caffeine is a psychotropic drug, and so is nicotine. There are also amphetamines, such as methamphetamine, which you might know of as speed, crystal meth, ice, meth, tea, Tina, there's a lot of names. Amphetamine psychosis, prolonged reaction to excessive use of stimulants. So amphetamine psychosis is when you essentially become insane. You start seeing things that aren't there, you start hearing voices, you become paranoid, you become angry, you become violent. You may recall the story from a few years ago of a man in Florida who did bath salts and then ate a person's face. That man was experiencing amphetamine psychosis. Amphetamines are stimulants. When taken in high doses, they produce a euphoric feeling, so they make you feel incredibly good. But side effects include insomnia, restlessness, and psychotic symptoms, as well as a crash where you just feel terrible upon withdrawal. Tolerance for amphetamines develops quickly, and users may become dependent. Ritalin, however, is a common treatment for hyperactive children. This is used in children with ADHD that suffer with being able to focus, and amphetamines allow them, such as Ritalin, to focus on one thing. The problem is that those children already have a deficiency in their brain, so really this is just balancing them out. If you are a regular person taking amphetamines, you are not going to be balanced out. It is going to do some terrible things. So you need to keep that in mind. That's also why sometimes if a child should not be put on Ritalin, it can make them what people will call a Ritalin zombie, because they are now imbalanced as a result of taking this medication they should not have had in the first place. Cocaine is a stimulant that produces euphoric feelings, so again, it makes you feel very good. Physical dangers include a sudden rise in blood pressure, decreased oxygen supply to the heart, and a quickened heart rate. However, overdosing on cocaine can cause restlessness, insomnia, tremors, that's when your body begins to shake for no reason, headaches, nausea, convulsions, hallucinations, delusions, and yes, cardiorespiratory collapse. So you can have a heart attack and die. So how does cocaine work? Well, it works by producing a euphoria, which will later cause the crash. So what happens is, if you remembered those vesicles way back in the biology chapter that are containing neurotransmitters. Normally, you know, a neural impulse fires along the terminal button and releases these neurotransmitters into the receptor sites of the next receiving neuron over the synaptic cleft. If those neurotransmitters don't make it across the cleft, then they just do reuptake, as you see in part B here, and then they can start again. But what happens when you do cocaine is that cocaine molecules actually make their way to your brain, to your neurons, and they act like extra bouncers or bodyguards. They block all reuptake. And so what happens then is that they force everybody else through, and they keep any more neurotransmitters from getting out. So you feel a huge rush that feels great, and then you crash, and it is a horrible feeling. Next we have nicotine. This is an addictive stimulant in tobacco smoke which creates a physiological dependence on tobacco. It appears to reduce stress and can also depress appetite and raise your metabolic rate. So that's why people say that they smoke to lose weight. But cigarette smoke also contains hydrocarbons, which are tars, and carbon monoxide. And secondhand smoke, which is produced when you, well, are smoking a cigarette, is actually worse than, well, first-hand smoke. Because first-hand smoke usually comes with a filter. There is no filter in secondhand smoke, so you are just getting all the poison and none of the benefit. Nicotine is found in tobacco products. Usage rate is high despite the clear evidence of cancer, heart attacks, lung and birth problems, and death that are associated with its use. Most smokers begin in their teenage years, partially because of peer pressure. Maybe they just want to rebel against their parents, because let's face it, if your parents tell you not to smoke and you're a teenager, the first thing you're going to want to do is smoke. But the problem becomes is that whatever reason they started, eventually they will become dependent on nicotine, and they will continue to use it. The next drug we're going to talk about is meth. Meth can be divided into two forms: left, which are over-the-counter products, and right, which is addictive. Meth lasts for about 6 to 8 hours. The body creates the same feeling of meth at lower doses when you are under stress by the adrenal glands. Yaba is a type of meth that combines, well, meth and caffeine. This is an example of a woman that was booked for her first offense of having meth, and the second picture is the same woman after just a few years. Here's another woman from 1998 to 2002. These are the effects that meth can have on your body in such a short time. This is meth mouth. This can happen from as little as one use. Your first use of smoking meth can actually cause your mouth to develop what we call meth mouth. The next drug we'll talk about is marijuana. Marijuana is a hallucinogen. Its most active ingredient is THC. It can produce relaxation, heightened and disordered perceptions, feelings of empathy, and reports of new insights. So if you ever experience someone that's high and they're saying, "Oh man, I just feel like I'm connected to the whole world, man," that's exactly what they're feeling. They're feeling this empathy and this new insight. But marijuana impairs perceptual motor coordination and impairs short-term memory and slows learning. So don't smoke and drive, essentially. It's just as bad as drink and driving. Marijuana can also elevate your heart rate, and if you're smoking it, has similar effects as smoking cigarettes, but without the tars and things like that. It depends on the method in which you use. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot physically that marijuana can do. One thing that we are concerned about is that we know in recent developments that marijuana can actually hinder the development of brain growth in adolescence. So it's not really a good idea to smoke a whole lot of marijuana before the age of 25, or you could be hindering how much your brain grows. By the age of 25, our brain is fully developed. So up until that point, it's still got work to do. Marijuana has been shown to also be helpful in people that have seizures, that have fibromyalgia, all sorts of things. So while there are benefits, keep in mind it is still illegal in most states, and therefore any use of it at all is considered substance abuse. Psychotropic drugs, such as PCP or phencyclidine, are derived from animal tranquilizers. This is very common among teenagers. The effects can last for 4 to 6 hours. Some people will experience hallucinations, detachment from the environment, euphoria, and it is considered one of the most dangerous street drugs. Hallucinogens alter perceptual experiences. You will get imaginary visions that seem too real. Usually, hallucinogens are not physiologically addictive, but there is a high risk of psychological dependence. So you may become psychologically dependent, but not physically. Flashbacks or bad trips affect about 25% of regular users. Types can include LSD, mescaline, psilocybin or magic mushrooms, and PCP or angel dust. LSD is a synthetic hallucinogen, produces vivid, colorful hallucinations, but you might have flashbacks. These can occur days, weeks, or longer after usage. So you didn't even use the stuff anymore, but now you're having flashbacks to when you were using it. You will have distorted perceptions that mimic having an LSD trip. Other hallucinogens include mescaline and PCP. MDMA is also known as ecstasy and creates a euphoric feeling. So, going back to psychotropic drugs, we know that we have tranquilizers, which can be milder drugs and are divided into two forms. So the major, which are not widely abused, and the minor, which can calm or relax you, things like sedatives and anti-anxiety medications. These are things like Xanax, Valium, Librium. There are also inhalants, which produce a sense of intoxication from sniffing glue or cleaning fluid or huffing paint. This is very common among children, but the problem is inhalants are highly addictive and are extremely dangerous as toxic fumes can cause brain damage. And that is it for the stages of consciousness. Please make sure that you're completing all of your assignments by their due date, and I will see you next time for the next lecture.